What is the most terrifying secret you've ever experienced while home alone? Story 1. A couple of years back, I woke up at 3 a.m. to see someone walk past my bedroom door. In my just woken up haze, I called out, thinking maybe my boyfriend had come over while I was sleeping, but I got no response. That's when I knew it wasn't him. I got out of bed, stupidly forgetting to take my phone or any kind of defensive item, and walked into the front room, where the light was on. There I found a random man staring at one of the walls. I asked him who he was, but he didn't answer. At that moment, I had fully woken up enough to realize I was in real danger. I ran back to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and bolted outside while calling the police. They arrived within minutes. It turned out the man was mentally ill, and to this day, neither I nor the police have any idea how he got in. Story 2. I moved into our house a month before my husband did, and one evening, I was painting the guest room with the windows wide open. I was focused on my work, listening to music, when I suddenly realized it had gotten dark outside. I heard leaves crunching, but didn't think much of it since a lot of neighbors walk their dogs. But when I went to close the windows, I saw a man standing in my backyard under a tree, maybe 5 feet from our back door. He was just staring up at me. Panic hit me, and I dropped to the floor, realizing the back glass door was probably open. Nothing but the screen was separating him from getting inside. He could have easily walked right in. I crawled to my phone and called my husband, who immediately called 911 while rushing home to me. We have a 6-foot-tall fence surrounding our yard. This man had hopped it just to watch me. I couldn't sleep properly for months after that. Story 3. A couple of years back, when I was working afternoon shifts, I woke up around 10 a.m. and started watching American Dad before getting out of bed. Suddenly, I heard my back door open. That wasn't unusual. Our family mainly used the back door, but no one was supposed to be home yet. Assuming it was my mom, I didn't think much of it. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My bedroom was on the second floor. I called out to my mom, but there was no response. Then my door cracked open and a head popped in. It was a man, probably in his 30s. Blonde beard, greasy mane of hair. He looked just as shocked to see me as I was to see him. At the time, I was about 260 pounds, 6 feet 3 inches, and 20 years old. And I was sitting there in only my boxers. Before I even had time to process what was happening, he asked, "Is this the W residence?" I just said no. He made a swift exit. Before I could even collect my thoughts, he was gone. Didn't even stop in the driveway. Later, I talked to a family friend who's a veteran police officer. Turns out a man matching his description had been doing this in nearby towns, acting confused about addresses to scope out homes and rob them. Story 4. I was babysitting a little girl who had a video monitor. Her parents had told me she never wakes up while they're out, but if she did, I should call them immediately. That night, I was watching TV with the monitor off to the side so I could keep an eye on her. Right around 11 p.m., I noticed the camera's view shift a few inches. Then it started to jiggle slightly, like someone was messing with it. I squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then, no joke, the entire screen burst into static for a few seconds. That's when the child started wailing. She stood up in her crib, screaming at the top of her lungs, just like one of the kids from The Sims. I waited a few minutes to see if she'd settle down, but when she didn't, I called her mom. Her mom just said, "Okay, we're on our way home anyway. We think she has nightmares sometimes, it's fine." Story 5. I was about 21 or 22, living alone at the time, and left my window open on a pleasant night. It was low enough to the ground that someone could get in if they really tried, but the screen wasn't easy to remove. Plus, I lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, so I didn't think twice about it. I woke up in the middle of the night because I smelled smoke. When I reached out to turn on my lamp, my hand hit something that was very obviously a person. My brain fully woke up in an instant. There was a shirtless man in my bedroom, smoking a cigarette and just staring at me. I remember yelling for him to get out. I must have scared him just as badly as he scared me, because he leapt out of the window and took off. I slammed it shut and immediately shoved a bookcase in front of it. The next morning, when I stepped outside in the daylight, I found the screen leaning against the house. I hadn't slept for the rest of the night, and ever since then, I've refused to sleep with a window open more than a crack. I also absolutely will not live on the ground floor of any building. I don't know if he was planning to rob me, hurt me, or both, but it was terrifying. And it makes me wonder how many times something like this had happened before without me waking up. Story 6. I was home from university for the summer and didn't have a job, so I was home alone while everyone else was at work. I live in a small village on a quiet street, so it was completely normal to have all the windows and doors open during the day. Late in the afternoon, I got a call from my dad. His voice was tense as he said, "I'm around the corner but struggling to get into the street. I'll explain when I'm home, but lock all the doors, close the windows, and go upstairs." This was obviously strange. We don't live in a bad area, and my dad isn't the type to joke about something like this. The tone in his voice made me do exactly what he said without hesitation. I locked everything, closed all the windows, and went upstairs. A few minutes later, he called again. "Some police officers are going to be going through the side gate into the backyard to check the shed. I'll be home soon." I was terrified but knew better than to ask questions at that moment. I stayed upstairs, peeking through the window just in time to see armed police searching our backyard. When my dad finally got home, I asked him what had happened. Turns out a 16-year-old kid from our street had taken some legal highs, stabbed a neighbor, and then ran off. The worst part? They only found him later that night because he was scared of the dark and came out of hiding. Absolutely terrifying. Story 7. When I was 19 and living in my first apartment, someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a burly, heavy-set man. Suddenly, he started screaming, demanding that I let him in. He was shouting things like he was going to beat me up and that he'd kick the door down if I didn't open it. Terrified, I immediately called the police. The moment someone answered, he started body slamming my door, trying to break in. I was freaking out, crying, and desperately hoping the cops would arrive in time. Thankfully, within 5 minutes, 5 officers showed up. The second he heard the sirens, he quickly walked away, but they caught him at the bottom of the stairs. Turns out he was after the previous tenant, but was extremely intoxicated. They arrested him, and thankfully, he never came back. Still, I was so shaken that I broke my lease and moved out 3 months later. It was in a very nice neighborhood, but after that, I just wished I was back home with my family instead of being across the country, completely alone. Story 8. This happened to me a couple of years ago. I've lived alone for a long time, so I don't scare easily. That night, I had just finished reading in bed, turned off my lamp, and cuddled up with my cat, ready to sleep. It was around 1:30 a.m. I had just closed my eyes when I suddenly heard a voice say, "Meow," but in a way that sounded like someone imitating a cat. My window was open, so I assumed it was just someone outside messing around, but then I opened my eyes. Standing in the middle of my bedroom was a small boy wearing a red jumper, waving his arm above his head. I shot up like a ninja and flipped the light on, my heart pounding. Nothing like this had ever happened in my house before. Not once. I spent the entire night completely freaked out, barely managing to get any sleep until the sun started coming up. When I told my friends, they thought it was hilarious. Meanwhile, I was dead serious, saying there was no way I was living in a haunted house. I even started Googling how to cleanse a house and looking up exorcists. Over the next few nights, even weirder things started happening. I left the TV on while I slept, but as soon as I started dozing off, I'd hear eerie voices coming from it. I also noticed strange shadows moving by the side of my bed. It was horrible. Eventually, I got so desperate that I literally said out loud, "I'm really tired, so if you could not haunt me for one night, I'd be really grateful." I had never believed in this kind of stuff before, so this was a complete paradigm shift for me. At work, I kept telling my friends about what was happening. One of them finally asked, "Are you on drugs or something?" Well, funny enough, I had just started taking a new medication, montelukast, for my asthma. When I got home, I checked the side effects. A rare one? Hallucinations. I stopped taking it, and just like that, no more hauntings. Story 9. I've been pretty fortunate compared to some of these stories, but one night, while my wife and son were visiting my mother-in-law, I was home alone when something terrifying happened. I walked back to our bedroom and glanced at the video baby monitor, only to see someone rummaging through my son's room. Immediately, I grabbed my firearm and yelled across the house, "I am armed! Come out slowly!" I repeated it over and over while cautiously making my way toward his room, my heart pounding. When I got there, I flipped on the light and nothing. The room was empty. Pumped full of adrenaline, I searched the entire house, checking every room, closet, and possible hiding place. Finally convinced that I was alone, I went back to my bedroom. And then he was back. The same figure was in my son's room again on the monitor. Taking a closer look, I realized something that still makes me cringe with embarrassment. I was looking at myself. The camera runs on Wi-Fi, streaming a live feed. But for some reason, it had been lagging with a massive delay. I had been watching my own movements from minutes earlier. It has never done that before or since. Story 10. My boyfriend worked away from home a lot, and I always struggled to sleep on the first night he was gone. One night, I was woken by the sound of a man shouting, followed by loud banging on wood, maybe a door. My stomach dropped. I jumped out of bed and rushed to my bedroom window, just in time to see a man dressed completely in black walking through my garden, heading toward the house. Panicked, I ran to the front of the house to check if he was leaving. He was, but as he walked away, he met up with another man, also dressed in black, walking straight toward my house. I was terrified. I called the police, who arrived within minutes and checked the backyard, but the men were gone. Turns out a neighbor had caught them trying to steal his car. One had escaped through the gardens, while the other ran through the roads. They had met up again right outside my house. I didn't sleep at all that night. My brother came to stay with me the next night, and honestly, I was never more relieved. I'm so glad I live in an apartment now. Much more security. Story 11. Somebody tried to break into my house while I was home alone. The whole place was quiet and dark that night. As I walked past the front door to head upstairs for bed, the handle suddenly jerked violently, like someone was trying to break in with brute force. Then whoever it was started either kicking or slamming their shoulder against the door, hard enough that the entire frame shook. I completely froze. My mind went blank. I just stood there like an idiot, staring at the door, too scared to move. Then my dog, who had been upstairs, bolted down like it was her time to shine. She scrambled across the tile, then let loose the most vicious, blood-curdling barks I've ever heard. Whoever was outside immediately fled. She was a very good girl. I miss her. Story 12. After my ex-husband moved out, I lived alone, which was fine except for the creepy guy across the street. He was at least 20 years older than me, did a lot of drugs, and for some reason had convinced himself that we should date. It started with unwanted advances. Then every time I left my house or came home, he would harass me. It escalated to him outright threatening me, saying things I won't repeat, but I will say that he made it clear he wanted to hurt me. At that point, I wasn't taking any chances. My new boyfriend helped me install motion detecting lights outside. I started carrying pepper spray at all times and keeping my house alarm on even when I was home. My boyfriend and I also made a plan. If I ever went a certain amount of time without responding to his messages and he couldn't reach me, he would immediately come check on me. I even CC'd him on my work calendar just in case. Things got so bad that my boyfriend actually moved in way sooner than we had planned, simply because I didn't feel safe anymore. Once creepy guys saw my boyfriend living there, working on his project cars in the driveway, coming and going, he stopped harassing me. A few months later, he moved away. I've never felt so unsafe in my own home as I did during that time. Every time the motion lights went on at night, I would lie awake, wondering if it was just a stray cat or if he was trying to break in. Story 13. One afternoon, someone knocked at my back door. I assumed it was the guy coming to read our meter, so I opened it without thinking. Next thing I knew, two huge men forced their way inside. One of them threw me against the wall, then shoved me down onto the couch. They told me they were Hell's Angels and that they were angry because my boyfriend was selling too many drugs, cutting into their profits. But something didn't add up. They kept calling me by my next-door neighbor's name. We had long suspected that our neighbors were selling drugs. The endless stream of people stopping by for less than 5 minutes made it obvious. But no matter how many times I told these guys I wasn't her, they wouldn't listen. One of them started searching my house while the other kept me pinned to the couch. But then I noticed something. They were hesitating. They started realizing they were in the wrong house because they couldn't find what they were looking for. My neighbor's house was a single floor with a basement. Mine was a 4-level split. Nothing matched what they had been told. Finally, I showed them a piece of my mail, proving my name, and that's when they knew they had seriously messed up. They quickly changed their story. Now they claimed they were after my neighbor's boyfriend because he had hurt someone they knew. I knew it was complete nonsense, but I didn't care. I just wanted them gone. Before they left, they robbed me of my cash. After that, I installed locks on every door, including the screen doors. Story 14. I forgot about this one before I posted another, but it's the day a terrified, naked teenager asked for help. I was loading laundry while my baby napped in my apartment just a door down. The kid had no clothes on and was being followed by an extremely tall, muscular man, the one responsible for his state. The man kept trying to get the kid to lower his voice and go back inside the apartment. I didn't have my phone with me, and it was terrifying as I searched for one. Shout out to the Bedford, Texas Police Department. They had 2 police cars blocking the parking lot exits before I even hung up. It took less than 2 minutes from the moment I started dialing to the officers separating the victim from the attacker. Their response time was incredible. And that child was so brave. As the man kept spewing things like, "Do you know how much this will hurt your mom if you tell? She's going to be heartbroken if you ruin this for her." The kid shook but shouted back, "Well, isn't that your fault? And if you cared at all, you never would have touched me. And my mom loves me. She's only going to ask why I didn't tell her sooner." I didn't know him at all, but I was so proud of that boy. His head was bowed, clearly embarrassed to be exposed in public, but he was still so strong, refusing to be ashamed of what someone else had done to him. Story 15. I had a choking scare when I was around 11. I was home alone watching TV while eating Skittles. I like to put a bunch in my mouth and make a Skittle ball that I would slowly chew on. Something on the show I was watching made me laugh, and I accidentally swallowed the whole thing. It got lodged in my throat. For a few seconds, I felt sheer terror. I realized no one was there to help me, and I was probably going to die. Then I suddenly remembered a scene from a cartoon or something, where someone jammed their stomach against a chair to dislodge something stuck in their throat. Desperate, I lunged at the corner of the recliner as hard as I could. Miraculously, it worked. The Skittle ball popped right out. It was pure luck because I had no idea what I was doing. But it was one of the worst feelings I've ever experienced. I never ate Skittles that way again. Story 16. I was chilling in my room when I suddenly heard this loud thump from the back door. It was so intense that I literally fell off my bed. I didn't want to investigate because, I value my life. But if someone was breaking in, I figured I probably should check it out. I messaged my friend with the details and asked her to FaceTime me. We got on chat and she muted herself so she wouldn't make any noise. I turned the camera around so she could see everything I saw, just in case it was a person and I didn't make it out. I walked through my house and reached the back door. It was locked, but the laundry room next to it was slightly open. I slowly crept up, took a quick glance inside. Nothing. So I turned to the back door and opened it. I went back to the laundry room for a closer look, just to be sure. That's when I noticed the broom, which was supposed to be hanging on the wall, now sprawled across the floor. Turns out it had just fallen. Still almost made me panic for nothing. Story 17. Growing up, I lived out in the country with only a few houses nearby. Both my parents worked full-time jobs in town, so I spent a lot of my summer days home alone. When I was 14, I had just gotten out of the shower and was getting ready in the bathroom mirror when I heard someone walking through the living room. Most of our house had hardwood floors, and there was a very distinct sound when someone moved across them. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents often came home during lunch to eat. After a couple of minutes of hearing footsteps, I finally called out, "Mom? Dad?" But there was no response. Instead, the walking stopped completely. I had my cell phone with me in the bathroom, so I called my mom and asked if she was home. She told me no, and that my dad wasn't either. I told her that someone was in the house. She immediately told me to get out. Luckily, the bathroom was only a few feet away from the front door. I opened the bathroom door and ran straight outside into the yard. My mom came and picked me up a little later, and my dad searched the entire house. But no one was there. This wouldn't have been too crazy, except for what happened a few days later. My neighbor's wife, who lived across the street, was taking a nap when she woke up to the sound of someone inside her house. When she opened her eyes, she saw a man standing in the hallway. She called out, and he immediately ran out the front door. When she checked outside, she saw that her garage door had been forced open. The man had broken in that way. But the most disturbing part? When she checked her bedroom, she found that her underwear drawer was open, and all of her panties were missing. He had taken them while she was sleeping. So naturally, I assumed that the sound I had heard in my house days before was probably him too. Story 18. I was home for the weekend from university, but my parents and siblings were away, so I was alone. Our house is pretty secluded, with a church and graveyard next door, and the closest neighbors were up the street, but not exactly close. I had all the doors locked and was settling in to watch a movie when the doorbell suddenly rang. I got up to answer it. No one was there. Then the back doorbell rang. Again, no one was there. This kept happening over and over, and it was completely pitch black outside. Then whoever it was started banging on the windows and yelling. At this point, I was freaking out. I grabbed my phone, started dialing the police, and yelled through the door that I had already called them. That's when I finally found out. It was a couple of guys from my university playing a prank on me. I was terrified and in tears by then, but they thought it was hilarious. Over the next 2 to 3 years, they kept doing things like this to me, and at the time, I actually considered them my friends. Now that I'm older and wiser, I realize they were just terrible people. Story 19. One night, I was home alone, grilling, relaxing, having a few beers, smoking, just enjoying myself. I was about halfway through my food when I suddenly heard a woman screaming for help. She was pounding on doors. At first, I hesitated, but once I realized she wasn't a threat, I sprinted up the road to find her. She was covered in blood. Through sobs, she told me that her husband had crashed their truck. It had flipped, and he was trapped inside. She begged me to help pull him out, but I hesitated. "Ma'am, I know this is an emergency, but I'm not an EMT." The worst part? I live deep in the woods, no cell service. Thankfully, I was able to flag down my landlord, and he called 911 from a landline. I stayed up until 3 a.m. that night. I just couldn't wind down after what happened. Everyone survived, and the man eventually got out on his own. But it was, without a doubt, the most terrifying night of my life. Story 20. When I was in college at Georgia Tech, I stayed in a building known as the GLC. It was on the far north side of campus, away from most of the colleges, so not many people stayed there. I liked it because it was quiet and easy to rebook the same room due to low demand. When I say quiet, I mean we barely ever heard our neighbors, if we even had them. The only sounds were usually the heavy outer doors slamming when someone entered or left. This happened during Thanksgiving break. I always stayed on campus during Thanksgiving to get work done and enjoy some peace. My 3 roommates were gone, so the already quiet GLC was even more silent. I was cleaning my room when I grabbed a bottle of Febreze. This is important because one of my roommates absolutely hated Febreze and would complain even if I sprayed it in my own room, since the AC would spread it around the apartment. So with him gone, I took the opportunity to spray some and finally get rid of that stale college dorm smell. The second I sprayed it, I heard one of my roommate's doors fly open and slam shut. Heavy, angry footsteps stomped into the living room and paced around. I immediately thought I had messed up and pissed off my roommate, but something about the way he reacted felt off. It was too fast, too aggressive. I walked into the living room, already starting to apologize, saying something like, "Sorry, man, I didn't know you were here." But as soon as I stepped in, the sound stopped. No one was there. I was so convinced I had heard someone that I even knocked on my roommate's doors, but they were gone. I texted them to confirm, and sure enough, they were all still away. I was completely alone. I never heard those footsteps again, or honestly, footsteps that loud, before or after that night. I still don't have an explanation. Story 21. My parents own a business on the same property as their house, but in a separate building. One building is obviously the shop, and the other is clearly a private residence, with a fence, gate, and all that. I was 13, home alone, and coming up from the basement with a load of laundry. I walked into the dining room to start folding clothes, and there was a man standing there, just looking around. I froze for half a second before I started yelling at him, demanding to know what the hell he thought he was doing, what he wanted, and why the hell he was in my house. My parents' dining room is at the back of the house. You have to walk through the entire lower level to get there. At no point did this guy stop and think, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't be here." Nope. He walked in like he owned the place. He stammered something about being a customer, saying he was there to pick up an order. I snapped that the shop had been closed for hours, screamed at him to get out, and basically drove him out of the house with sheer volume alone. He bolted to his car and sped off. When my parents came home, I told them what had happened. The next day, this guy actually had the audacity to call and complain to my dad about my nasty attitude and my awful language. My dad cut him off mid-sentence and told him he was lucky I didn't just stab him. He was now permanently banned from the property, and his order would be shipped to him after he paid for it. For once, my dad was completely on my side. That moment erased any doubts I had about whether I had overreacted. Still, I was paranoid for months after that. It messed with me bad. Story 22. Me and my dog were chilling in the basement when all of a sudden, I saw what was very clearly a flashlight beam moving across the yard near the tiny basement window. My heart nearly stopped. Just a few weeks earlier, my sister and I had been up late, and after turning on the kitchen light, we had seen a person sprinting across the yard, running away the second they realized someone was awake. I thought I was about to piss myself with fear. I ran upstairs, turned on a light so whoever was out there would know someone was home, and let the dog out. She went absolutely nuts, barking, whining, losing her mind. I slowly stuck my head out the door. Turns out it was just the neighbor kids who had recently moved in, searching for their lost cat. I was furious but mostly relieved. I told them that out here, in a rural area, standing in someone's yard at night with a flashlight wasn't a good idea. It could easily get them shot. Story 23. I got one. When I was younger, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. Because of that, he spent a lot of time in the hospital, and I was often left home alone. One day, I was sitting at home, doing my homework, when I heard a buzzing noise outside. I looked out the window and saw this huge bald man in cut-off shorts, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, holding a weed whacker and some shears. He was walking straight toward our house. I panicked. I immediately grabbed my toddler sister, ran into the basement with the dogs, and cried. I had no idea what to do. After a few agonizing minutes, I called 911, and officers arrived. One came down to get me and my sister, while the other went to question the guy. Well, when I finally stepped outside, I realized the man was actually one of my parents' best friends. He had come over to help take care of the lawn for my dad. I was mortified. The cops thought it was hilarious, but still made me call my parents to confirm they actually knew him. I couldn't stop apologizing, but he was a good sport about it. He even told me he was glad I called the cops because at least it meant I knew what to do in an emergency. Still, I don't think I've ever been that embarrassed in my life. Story 24. My parents were on vacation, so I was home alone for the weekend when I was 15. Late at night, I was watching TV when I caught movement in the corner of my eye through the window. I turned to look outside and saw what I thought was a bear standing on its hind legs, staring at me. The thing is, a bear on its hind legs still looks like a bear. But this looked more like a human with the head of a bear, covered in bear fur. I was completely frozen in fear, but also too focused on trying to process what I was actually looking at. The stare-off lasted for about 8 seconds before it casually strolled away, still on its hind legs, into my neighbor's backyard. I was so terrified that I ran upstairs and blocked the stairwell with an armchair before calling my parents. At first, they didn't believe me, but they also knew when I was lying and when I wasn't. Eventually, they assumed it must have been an escaped bear, even though we live in the Netherlands, where wild bears don't exist. They ended up cutting their trip short and came home early. It was a sleepless night, but once they got back, they called the police. I filed a police report, and I kept insisting that it wasn't just a normal bear. But they didn't seem to take that part seriously. They told us they'd get back to us if they found anything, but we never heard from them again. It took me 2 months to sleep properly again, and I needed medication to get through the worst of it. To this day, everyone, including my parents, insists that I just saw an escaped bear. But I know what I saw. Maybe it was some crazy person in a bear suit. Maybe it was something else entirely. Either way, it still terrifies me to this day, and I've never heard of anyone having a similar experience. Story 25. I was house and dog sitting for a former professor of mine. They lived in this funky cabin-like house surrounded by trees, and I always loved hanging out there. Though at night, it did get a little spooky. The dogs, 2 big Dutch shepherds, one of whom was pregnant, were settled in, and I was in the guest room, just about to fall asleep. Right as I was drifting off, I heard a noise downstairs. It sounded like voices. I immediately froze. The dogs were moving around, and I distinctly heard a woman's voice talking to them. My mind raced. Had my professor come home early? Or were there burglars in the house who didn't even care about being stealthy? I laid there paralyzed, wondering how quickly the cops would arrive if I called. After what felt like forever, I finally worked up the courage to leave my room and investigate. My heart was pounding as I made my way downstairs, preparing myself for the worst. That's when I realized it was the pregnant dog. Her massive belly was making weird noises, and apparently those noises sounded exactly like a woman talking. I nearly had a heart attack over a dog. Let's just say I'm never getting a Dutch Shepherd. Story 26. I was house and dog sitting for my uncle out in the boonies. The dog, an overweight, deaf lump, barely moved unless it was time to eat. My uncle had only been renting the place for about 2 months when, at around 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. I answered, and the person standing there seemed off. Maybe odd is a better word. They were rambling, asking if I knew where the Floyds lived. I told them no and closed the door. Something about the encounter felt weird, but I tried to shake it off. About an hour and a half later, at 9:30 p.m., the doorbell rang again. This time I was freaked out. It was dark now, and I definitely wasn't expecting anyone. I immediately turned off the living room lights and army crawled to the door, trying to look through the peephole, but there was no one there. I checked out the window. Nothing. I walked to the back of the house, and that's when I saw it. A shadow on the back deck. A person standing there. My heart nearly stopped. I immediately called the cops, and they showed up within 4 minutes. They did a full search of the property, but they couldn't find anyone. That's when they told me something unsettling. The orange bulb in the lamppost by the driveway? Apparently that can be a signal for, this is a drug house. They advised us to change the bulb. My uncle swore nothing like that had ever happened before, but my dad wasn't taking any chances. He came over that night, changed the bulb, and stayed with me until morning. Story 27. I was playing N64, completely home alone. Mom was at work, and my brother and sister were gone. For some reason, I turned around and glanced at the hallway, which was being lit up by the bathroom light. And that's when I saw it. A silhouette, a kid about my age, maybe 10 years old. He had a really pronounced cowlick in his hair. It was one of those moments where I saw it, didn't quite register it, turned back around to check, and it was gone. Just like that. This was before cell phones, so I had no way to call anyone. Instead, I just went to my neighbor's house and hung out there until my sister got home. The thing is, weird stuff had always happened in that house. It was old. My siblings and I had grown up hearing strange noises and seeing things that didn't quite make sense. Nothing paranormal necessarily, but just off. Dishes would end up on the floor in the middle of the night. Lights and fans would turn on and off on their own. Doors would close and open as we walked toward them. Our dog would sometimes randomly bark into dark corners, like he saw something we didn't. It was constant. But strangely enough, none of us were ever scared. I think over time, we just accepted that it was an old house, shifting, causing weird things to happen. But that night, that was the first time I saw something that looked like an actual person. To this day, I still tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Story 28. I was house and dog sitting for my uncle out in the boonies. The dog, an overweight and deaf lump, barely moved unless it was time to eat. My uncle had only been renting the place for about 2 months when, at around 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. I answered, and the person standing there seemed off. Maybe odd is a better word. They were rambling, asking if I knew where the Floyds lived. I told them no and closed the door. Something about the encounter felt weird, but I tried to shake it off. About an hour and a half later, at 9:30 p.m., the doorbell rang again. This time I was freaked out. It was dark now, and I definitely wasn't expecting anyone. I immediately turned off the living room lights and army crawled to the door, trying to look through the peephole. But there was no one there. I checked out the window. Nothing. I walked to the back of the house, and that's when I saw it. A shadow on the back deck. A person standing there. My heart nearly stopped. I immediately called the cops, and they showed up within 4 minutes. They did a full search of the property, but they couldn't find anyone. That's when they told me something unsettling. The orange bulb in the lamppost by the driveway? Apparently that can be a signal for, this is a drug house. They advised us to change the bulb. My uncle swore nothing like that had ever happened before, but my dad wasn't taking any chances. He came over that night, changed the bulb, and stayed with me until morning. Story 29. I was playing N64, completely home alone. Mom was at work, and my brother and sister were gone. For some reason, I turned around and glanced at the hallway, which was being lit up by the bathroom light. And that's when I saw it. A silhouette. A kid about my age, maybe 10 years old. He had a really pronounced cowlick in his hair. It was one of those moments where I saw it, didn't quite register it, turned back around to check, and it was gone. Just like that. This was before cell phones, so I had no way to call anyone. Instead, I just went to my neighbor's house and hung out there until my sister got home. The thing is, weird stuff had always happened in that house. It was old. My siblings and I had grown up hearing strange noises and seeing things that didn't quite make sense. Nothing paranormal necessarily, but just off. Dishes would end up on the floor in the middle of the night. Lights and fans would turn on and off on their own. Doors would close and open as we walked toward them. Our dog would sometimes randomly bark into dark corners, like he saw something we didn't. It was constant, but strangely enough, none of us were ever scared. I think over time we just accepted that it was an old house shifting, causing weird things to happen. But that night, that was the first time I saw something that looked like an actual person. To this day, I still tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Story 30. Most of my Home Alone experiences don't come close to the crazy stuff I've seen posted here, but one experience was still pretty freaky. My parents were out for the week, leaving me in charge of the house and the dog. It was nighttime, and it was about time to take the dog out for a bathroom walk. I turned on the light to the front porch, and immediately my stomach dropped. Right in front of the door, stretched between the two pillars, was a massive spider web. And right in the center of it sat a huge, fat spider. Now, realistically, it was probably only about the size of the circle you make with your thumb and index finger, but to me, it looked gigantic. What really messed me up, though, was the sheer size of the web itself. It was at least 5.5 feet wide, stretching completely across my only way out. And before anyone asked, no, I don't live in Australia. This was in the US South. And no, I didn't stumble upon some cursed game board that made drum sounds. This was just a normal night ruined by nature. Since there was no other way outside, I had no choice but to tear it down. Naturally, I grabbed a broom, knocked it down as fast as I could, and then sprinted back inside like my life depended on it. It took me a solid 15-minute cool-down period before I finally worked up the nerve to go back out with the dog. Even then, I was paranoid that the spider was plotting its revenge. Story 31. During the summer before 8th grade, my little brother and I were home alone playing video games while our parents were at work. My brother, who was 4 years younger than me, suddenly paused the game and said, "I think I hear someone knocking on the door." He went to check, then came back looking confused. "There's someone knocking, and I don't know them." I barely glanced up. "Oh well, they'll go away." People in our neighborhood would sometimes come by selling tools or services, so I figured it was no big deal. They did not go away. Instead, they kicked in the front door and tried to rob us. My brother ran and hid in his closet while I grabbed a tiny machete we had and hid behind the couch, waiting to ambush the intruders. Two grown-ass men came inside, and the second they got near me, I jumped out swinging and screaming bloody murder. I don't know if it was the machete, the screaming, or just the sheer chaos of the moment, but they ran. Fortunately, they weren't there to hurt us, just to steal whatever they could for drug money. If they had wanted to fight, they could have easily overpowered me. It was an absolutely terrifying experience. I'm 22 now, and I still struggle to feel safe in my own home. Story 32. When I was 13 or 14, I was home alone for the night. My parents were at a big dinner with friends and coworkers, and my older brother had gone out with his friends. About an hour after he left, the doorbell rang. I knew better than to answer it or even go near the door, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of someone yanking on the door handle. Someone was trying to break in. I panicked and grabbed the phone to call my brother, half hoping it was just him playing a dumb prank. But the second I heard his voice, I knew it wasn't him. He told me to hang up and call 911 immediately. He and his friends were already on their way over. I dialed 911, and while I was on the phone with the operator, I heard the burglars moving around the house, checking the windows. Then I realized something horrifying. I was standing right in the open. If they looked through the window, they'd see me. I told the 911 operator that I needed to hide, quickly told her where I was going, then dropped the phone and ran. This was the 90s, so it wasn't a cordless phone. I had no choice but to leave it behind. I hid in the guest room closet, curled up and shaking until the police arrived. My brother and his friends showed up just a few seconds later, and while I talked to the cops, he called our parents. There were smudges of boot prints all over the front door, and the officers found at least 2 sets of tracks circling the house in the snow. For at least a month after that, I couldn't handle being alone. The thought of it terrified me. Story 33. I fully expect skepticism toward my story, but all I can say is that I know what I experienced. When I was 17, I moved in with my boyfriend, future husband, his mother, younger brother, and sister. His family is Colombian, and at the time his mother practiced Santeria. She had a Santeria shrine in her bedroom closet, and her boyfriend would sacrifice small animals in the garage. Baby chickens, goats, and once, even a peacock he kept in the backyard one summer to use its feathers for rituals. At the time, my boyfriend worked until 10 p.m. and didn't get home until around 10:30 or 11. His mom and siblings were usually busy in the evenings with work and school, so I was home alone most nights, just me and my cat. We had the downstairs bedroom, while his mom and siblings' rooms were upstairs. Every night I would hear loud footsteps coming from his mom's room, directly above me. At first I tried to ignore it, but the more I ignored it, the louder it got. After a week of hearing the footsteps, the voices started. At first it was low murmuring, just a faint sound of people talking and laughing. But each night it got louder and louder. It scared me so much that I started locking myself and my cat in the bedroom until someone got home. After almost 3 weeks of this, I finally told my boyfriend. He believed me and said it was the spirits his mother communicated with during her Santeria rituals. I told him it freaked me out, and he reassured me that as long as I stayed out of her room, they wouldn't bother me. He was wrong. A few nights later, I was alone again and decided to go into the kitchen to grab something to eat. The stairs leading to the second floor started in the kitchen, and as soon as I walked in, I heard the soft patter of footsteps. I looked toward the stairs just in time to see a small, human-like figure darting up them. My stomach dropped. I ran to the bottom of the stairs and caught a glimpse of something white turning the corner into his mom's room. A flurry of fabric, a white dress. And that's when it hit me. His mother had this African doll she used in her rituals. It wore a white peasant dress. I didn't wait to process it. I grabbed my cat and ran outside, locking myself in the spare car in the driveway until someone came home. His mom arrived first and looked confused when she saw me sitting in the car with the cat. I told her everything. Her face became serious and she asked if I had followed the doll into her room. I told her absolutely not. She nodded and said, "Good, good. I'll make sure she doesn't leave the room again, and I'll make sure she knows not to harm you. Don't worry." That was it. No explanation, just that. When my boyfriend got home, I told him I wanted out of that house. He agreed and we moved into our own place the following month. We've been married for almost 17 years now, and his mother still has that doll. It sits on a rocking chair in her bedroom. Every time I see it, I swear its eyes follow me around the room. Story 34. I can't think of the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but recently I had a moment that freaked me out more than it probably should have. We have 10 cats and our house is filled with shelves for them to climb, play on, and lounge around. It was super late one night, all the windows open to let in the breeze, and every single cat in the house was asleep, either curled up on the shelves or sprawled out on the couch with me. The house was peaceful, silent. Then without warning, every cat woke up at the exact same time and snapped their heads toward the same window, the one right behind my head. One by one, they slowly stood, their fur puffing up as they let out deep, guttural growls. They started hissing, their tails puffed up like bottle brushes, their ears flattened against their heads. Then, still in sync, they began slinking away toward the bedroom, moving fearfully. Before I could react, the dog jolted awake and immediately started losing his mind, barking aggressively at the same window. It was that deep, guttural bark, the kind that dogs only use when something isn't right. Then suddenly he bolted toward the bedroom as if chasing something that had already moved, but not before barking one final bone-chilling warning at the darkness beyond the window. I didn't even think. I just moved. I cut the lights in the bedroom so I couldn't be seen, grabbed my gun, and slapped the clip into place. Then I dashed through the house, locking every single window and muttering, "Oh, fuck. Oh, Jesus, God," under my breath. Meanwhile, the dog was still in the bedroom, standing at the window completely still, staring into the darkness of the cornfield that stretched beyond our yard. That's what scared me the most, the cornfield. My house is surrounded on 3 sides by vast fields of corn. It would take 3 steps for someone to vanish completely into them, unseen. For a while, nothing happened. The dog stayed focused on the same spot, unmoving. The cats had all disappeared into the shadows of the bedroom. I sat there, gripping my gun, trying to control my breathing. I didn't call the police. I told myself it wasn't necessary, at least not yet. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that something was out there that night. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was someone. But when all 11 of my pets wake up at once from a dead sleep and hiss at the same window, something was definitely out there. Story 35. This will probably get buried, but here goes. When I was around 8 years old, my parents stepped out one evening with my younger sister. They weren't going to be gone long, so I planned to just sit and play video games until they got back. I had only been alone for a few minutes when I started hearing thumping upstairs. I froze. I sat there listening, my heart pounding. The thumping wasn't just random noise, it was moving, shifting from one side of the house to the other, right above me. I knew I wasn't supposed to be alone. I knew I had locked the doors, but someone, or something, was upstairs. I mustered just enough child courage to grab the corded phone and crawl behind the couch. I dialed my parents in a panicked whisper. "I think there are robbers upstairs," I told them. "I hear thumping. I think someone's in the house." They tried to calm me down, telling me they were already on their way home. But I wasn't about to sit there and wait to be caught by whoever was up there. Still gripping the phone, I sat behind the couch for another minute, my entire body shaking as I listened to the sounds continuing above me. Finally, I made a break for it. I sprinted to the nearest window, climbed out, and jumped into the bushes outside. A few minutes later, my parents pulled into the driveway and found me crying, standing in the dark at the top of the driveway, wearing nothing but my Rugrats boxers. My mom immediately ran to me and hugged me while my dad went inside to investigate. My sister, still in her car seat, just stared at me like I had lost my mind. A few tense minutes later, my dad came outside. He had found the source of the intruder. It was my sister's pet hamster. She had left it in its ball upstairs, and it had been scurrying around, bumping into walls, causing all the noise. To this day, I still haven't lived it down. Story 36. I had just moved in with my boyfriend, and he was out of town for some work training. That night, I had gone out with my best friend for some shopping and dinner, and afterwards, she dropped me off at home. As I walked up the porch, something felt off. My skin prickled with unease, like my body knew something I didn't. I brushed it off, figuring it was just because it was late and dark, and I was still getting used to the new neighborhood. I set down my bags, unlocked the front door, opened it, then reached down to grab my bags. And that's when it hit me. An overwhelming wave of dread. I looked up and froze. Sitting on the stairs inside the house was a dark silhouette, a person just sitting there unmoving. And then, in the silence, they spoke. "Boo!" I snapped. Without thinking, I whipped my keys as hard as I could at the figure and took off in a dead sprint across the yard. My heart was in my throat, my vision tunneling as I ran, until I heard someone yell my name. It was my boyfriend. He had come back into town early to surprise me. He had heard me coming up the steps and decided to scare me as a joke. Well, he succeeded, and for his effort, he earned himself a black eye, because my key-throwing skills were damn good that night, even in the dark. Story 37. I was home alone once when I was around 12 or 13, and from my bedroom upstairs, I suddenly heard someone trying to open our side door, which we used as our main entrance. It was locked, and whoever it was didn't try to unlock it or attempt it again. I sat there, my heart pounding, waiting for something else to happen, but the house stayed silent. My suspicion grew, so I crept to a window upstairs that didn't have a view of the door, but overlooked the driveway. No cars. That meant it wasn't my parents. Panic started creeping in as I became more and more convinced that someone was trying to break into the house. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. It went straight to voicemail. My voice was shaking as I left a message, telling him someone was trying to break in and that I was scared. I stayed completely still, listening, waiting for another sound. Footsteps, a knock, a window breaking, but nothing came. The silence only made my fear worse. A few minutes later, my dad called me back, and the truth of the situation made me feel both relieved and incredibly stupid. Turns out it was just my stepsister. She had been dropped off by her dad and had forgotten her keys, so she tried the door and, finding it locked, called my dad to ask how long they would be or if there was a spare key hidden somewhere. That's why my call had gone to voicemail. He had been on the phone with her. We also lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, so instead of pulling into our driveway, her dad had just turned his car around in the street before leaving. My parents kept the voicemail and still laugh at me for it to this day. Story 38. I lived in a pretty rural area in Tennessee and was home alone one afternoon. My only company was my two Weimaraners, who were always by my side. The day had been quiet until a man showed up at my door selling magazines. I cracked the door open just enough to tell him, "No, thank you," and went to close it. That's when he shoved his foot between the door and the jamb, keeping me from shutting it. My stomach dropped. Before I could react, he started pushing the door open, his strength easily overpowering mine. I was pressing against it with everything I had, but it wasn't enough. In that moment, I was absolutely convinced I was about to become a victim. Then suddenly, a deep, guttural growl cut through the air, and in a flash, my sweet, gentle dog, the male, the one who usually curled up in my lap like a big baby, transformed into Cujo. Without hesitation, he latched onto the man's calf with a grip like a bear trap, refusing to let go. The man screamed in agony, trying to shake him off, but my dog held firm. Meanwhile, my female Weimaraner, though she didn't attack, was adding to the chaos. She circled him, barking wildly, jumping at him, making it impossible for him to focus on anything except escaping. The man was thrashing, desperately trying to pry my dog off his leg while simultaneously scrambling toward his car. It wasn't until he was halfway down the driveway that my dog finally let go, leaving behind shredded fabric, a trail of blood, and bits of flesh on the ground. As soon as he was gone, I called the sheriff, but by the time the deputies arrived, the man was long gone. All that was left was the evidence of what had happened: his torn clothing, the blood on the pavement, and my dogs standing proudly as if they had just done exactly what they were born to do. Even though I was beyond grateful for the incredible job my dogs did to protect me, I was absolutely terrified thinking about what could have happened if they hadn't been there. Story 39. When I was about 10 years old, I was home alone during the day, just hanging out in my room when the doorbell rang. The way our house was laid out, the staircase led straight down to the front door, which had 2 glass windows on either side. Curious but cautious, I crept downstairs and peeked around the corner of the landing to see who it was. There was a man standing there, staring through the window. The moment my head popped into view, his eyes locked onto mine. I gasped and immediately yanked myself back, heart pounding. That's when he slammed his hand against the door and started shouting, "I see you in there!" Panic flooded me. My breathing turned into short, sharp gasps as I sprinted back upstairs, shaking so hard I could barely think. I grabbed the phone and called the only person I could think of, our family friend who lived up the street. No answer. My hands were trembling as I hung up. I didn't know what else to do, so I just curled up in my parents' bedroom, crying, waiting for him to leave. The doorbell rang again, and again, then more pounding. "I know you're in there!" I held my breath, pressing my back against the wall, staring at the door like I could will him to go away. Then suddenly the noise stopped. Minutes passed. I didn't hear a car, no footsteps leading away, nothing, just silence. I stayed hidden for what felt like forever before finally working up the courage to peek outside. He was gone. To this day, I have no idea who he was or what he wanted. It was long before cell phones, so I couldn't call my mom, and I had always been told never to call my dad at work unless it was a real emergency. But looking back, I think that definitely counted. Story 40. It was around midnight, and I had just moved into a new apartment alone, in the middle of a breakup. I was unpacking, hanging stuff up, while my 2 cats played in the living area. It was quiet, the first time I had truly been alone in my own space. Then suddenly I heard a sharp, spraying noise, like a burst of water from a hose. My mind immediately went to panic. Had something broken? Was there a leak? I turned the corner and saw my little orange cat lying in front of the fireplace, struggling to breathe. She was barely 4 years old and she'd always been healthy, aside from a mild heart murmur the vet had been monitoring. But now she was gasping, her tiny body convulsing, her eyes wide with fear. I stood frozen, my mind racing, trying to process what was happening. Then it hit me. She was dying. I had never felt so alone. Panic surged through me, but somehow, with shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and called the closest emergency vet. My voice was barely coherent as I tried to explain what was happening. They asked if she was still breathing. Yes, but barely. They told me to bring her in immediately. Still in my pajamas, I wrapped her in a towel and held her against me as I ran to the car. The entire drive, 20 agonizing minutes, I could hear her struggling, gurgling, her tiny meows breaking my heart. I kept whispering, "Hold on, baby, just hold on." She made it to triage. They took her from my arms the second I walked in, putting her on oxygen, trying to stabilize her. For a moment, I thought maybe she would be okay. But then the vet came out and explained. Her heart was failing. It had been pumping fluid into her lungs. They showed me the x-rays. Her lungs were filling rapidly, and without invasive surgery, it was irreversible. But even if she did have the surgery, it would only prolong the inevitable. Her heart just wasn't built to function properly. I went home without her. I walked into that empty apartment, my other cat wandering around confused, searching for the one she had been bonded to. The silence was suffocating. That was mid-2019, and I still haven't shaken the loss. Story 41. Our house was long, with the master bedroom at one end and the living room all the way at the back. I was around 14 at the time, sitting in the living room watching TV on a regular afternoon in full daylight, when I started hearing faint rustling noises. I turned the TV off, straining to listen, and it sounded exactly like someone rummaging through plastic bags at the far end of the house. Panic hit me instantly. My mind went straight to the worst-case scenario. A murderer had broken into the house and was searching for valuables, and it was only a matter of time before they made their way to me. I completely lost it. I started rocking back and forth, crying, begging any higher being that might exist not to let me die, bargaining with promises I'd never be able to keep, sweating bullets. And the worst part? The back door was right there. I could have easily escaped, but my fight or flight response had completely failed me. After what felt like an eternity, the rustling continued, still coming from the exact same spot. That's when something finally clicked in my brain. If someone was actually inside the house, why hadn't they moved? Why hadn't I heard footsteps? Realization slowly crept in, pushing aside my irrational fear just enough for me to build up the courage to investigate. I grabbed the stick we used to prop open a door, and for extra security, a knife from the kitchen, then slowly crept down the long hallway, carefully avoiding the creaky floorboards. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. When I reached my parents' bedroom, I finally solved the mystery. The window was open. The wind was billowing the curtains inwards, making them brush over some clothes sitting in plastic bags over and over again, creating the exact noise that had sent me into a full-blown existential crisis. The relief that washed over me was so overwhelming that the first thing I did after putting the knife away was run straight to the bathroom. I don't think I've ever been so grateful for a normal bodily function in my life. Story 42. When I was younger, I lived in a small town in the Northeast. One night, while my parents were out at dinner, I was home alone with my older brother. It must have been around 8 or 9 p.m., and even though the sun was still out, the doorbell suddenly rang. We both went to check, but when we opened the door, there was no one there. We looked around, waited for a moment, then shrugged it off and went back inside. About an hour or two later, we were down in the basement when we suddenly heard knocking. But this time, it wasn't at the front door. It was coming from the door that led inside the garage. That meant whoever was knocking was already inside the garage. We completely freaked out. My heart felt like it was about to explode as we bolted up the stairs. My brother ran ahead, and when he swung open the door to the garage, we saw that the garage door was wide open. Outside, it was pitch black. The night air felt heavy, thick with something that made my stomach churn. Without hesitating, my brother slammed the garage door shut and locked it. We stood there listening, waiting for another sound. Footsteps, voices, anything. But there was nothing. Silence. This was around 1999, before cell phones were common, and we had no way to contact our parents. We only knew one thing. If something was wrong, we should call the cops. But we were just kids, and we were terrified we'd get in trouble if it turned out to be nothing. So instead, we just sat there, wide-eyed and silent, jumping at every creak in the house, waiting for our parents to come home. A couple of hours later, they finally did. We immediately told them everything, but they didn't believe us. They brushed it off as our imaginations running wild, maybe a prank from some local kids. We tried to forget about it. Then weeks later, while riding our four-wheeler out in the massive field behind our house, a field that stretched all the way to the airport, we stumbled upon something that made my skin crawl. It was a makeshift hideout. There were signs of a small fire that had been built, torn clothes scattered around, empty water bottles lying in the dirt. At the time, we thought it was cool. We didn't even connect it to what had happened that night. It was only later, as more time passed, that the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been living out there, and that night they had been inside our garage.